I said, "How's it going?" Things are slow. It's down. I said, "How's Tony doing?" And I remember the manager looks at me and goes, "Tony has no idea that there's a recession."
And here we go again, against the odds. It doesn't take a genius. Here are Mark and Mike.
Ramsey!
Marshall, look at us together again after a severe absence.
Oh, yes, yes. Both our schedules were crazy.
They were.
Yeah, just insane. But as always, in our travels, we've seen and heard stuff from our adoring public, both of them. And so we've also seen and heard things that have been impactful for people that we work with. And so plenty
That's
to share.
That's correct. Absolutely. Some of the things were shared with us when we were younger people.
Mhm.
In fact, I just pulled off the shelf, Mike,
Ooh.
a little ancient copy from my dad of The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. Subtitle, by the way, Powerful Lessons in Personal Change. Emphasis on the personal. So I think you brought to the table today the fact that we had never covered a very basic lesson from the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and I'm a little shocked that we haven't, but I don't think we have. So we're going to talk about it. It's in fact on a little graphic behind your head right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. For those of you on YouTube, this is what we're talking about. Yeah. In regards to the book, the first time I saw the book, it was 1989, 1990. And a friend of mine he was a practicing attorney, but he wanted to get into the training business. He wanted to be a coach, consultant, trainer.
Yeah.
And so I met it with him, right? We were doing some volunteer work. And he was talking to people about the book. And then he was walking them out into the parking lot and he opened up the trunk of his car and he was selling Seven Habits of Highly Effective People out of the trunk of his car. Like it was some sort of contraband. Right. It's like this book will change your life. Give me $10. Right. And he had two cases of Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I don't know how many he sold, right? He wasn't making a penny on them. It was just he believed so much in the book that he was selling them at cost and he was just driving around.
Now, is this our mutual friend that you're discussing? That's a lawyer who became a coach and trainer?
Well, yeah, Gary Minor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Gary was
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
That's even funnier now that I know for sure that that's who you're talking about because I can so see him doing that.
And so yeah, Gary a few years later, right, closed his law practice.
Right.
Went into coaching, and I have to credit a lot of it to this book that he just was so passionate about that changed his life and that he was certain would change other people's lives. And it's still a best-selling book. I don't know what the math is 34 years later.
Yeah. I mean, mine says number one national bestseller, and this is a 1990 edition. It was copyrighted 1989. I don't even want to know how many millions it's sold at this point. But I would say, and funny enough, it does say $10. But here's the thing, Gary Minor, I frankly want to give him a free plug. I don't know what kind of work he's doing nowadays. I haven't talked to him in a year or so, but I never walked away from a conversation with Gary where he wasn't challenging me to do something that was under my control, that would further me on some thing that I was wishing for, some goal I had in mind, something that I thought I needed to achieve. And he'd say, okay, so what are the things you can do? Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect setup to what we're talking about. And I guess we should also mention you met Stephen Covey, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I had lunch with Stephen Covey. Had no idea that I had lunch with Stephen Covey. So I'm actually at a lunch with Bill Clinton when he was president, name drop. And so I'm with some powerful dudes. I'm sitting by this small elfish guy, a bald head, sitting right next to me, tried to engage him. Hi, I'm Mike. And he goes, hi, I'm Steve. And like, hey, what brings you here? Just excited to have lunch with the president. And then there's all these other people at the table, like the CEO of the National Speakers Bureau,
Yeah.
all these, the guy who's head of this, big energy company. So I'm like, well, he's not talking. So I talk to these guys. So I get up, I'm walking away from the table. Multiple people run up to me and they go, "Oh my gosh, what was it like to have lunch with Stephen Covey?" And I'm like, "Who?" And they're like, "Oh, Steve." No idea. Right? Read the
So
book.
he didn't share any pearly nuggets.
No, he didn't talk to me about any of the 7 habits, not a one. So I was able to redeem myself. Later that night, we had a reception, and he was standing there all by himself. He's a very introverted guy.
Huh.
He's standing there all by himself, and I'm like, "Steve, great having lunch with you. Hey, I love your book." We had a great conversation, but yeah, I'm a moron.
That's too funny.
In my defense, right? I was broke. I couldn't afford the hardback version. So in the paperback version, when you hold it up on there, his photo's not on the book on the paperback version. I found out later on the hardback version, if you could afford that, yeah, Steve had a nice big photo, so I could have picked him out of a lineup.
Yeah, this is pre-World Wide Web giving you access to all sorts of promotional items about the man. So yeah, makes sense. Totally makes sense. Um,
That's my brush with fame.
well, so this concept, do you want to just sort of briefly give the concept? We've meandered about this a little bit, but do you want to give the brief concept of what we mean by the circle of influence?
Yeah, so the idea that Covey put forth in his book, the circle of influence and circle of concern, and the way I introduce this concept when I'm talking to managers, this is probably my best sales meeting. When I
Mm,
do this as a sales training, it's the one that seems to resonate the most with people and have a long lasting impact. And so the first question I ask though is, show of hands, how many of you are always doing something?
hmm
And you'd be amazed how many people don't raise their hands. like half the room will go, "Yeah, I'm always doing something," and the other half don't. And then it took me a while to figure out through a little questioning. So they were already categorizing what I mean by doing something. And so in their minds, they had calculated, right, the difference between doing something useful or productive or proactive versus doing stuff that really doesn't, move anything forward. And so
Right.
they had made that decision that I'm not always doing something that's productive, and that's why they didn't raise their hand.
Interesting.
So the idea of you're always doing something, so that means 100% of your time is spoken for. Now the question is, you're either doing something productive, right? Operating in what Covey calls the circle of influence, things that I can control, that I can have influence over. So I'm either standing in that circle doing something productive, or I'm standing in what Covey calls the circle of concern. And
hmm
these are, the concerns are things they're ideas, they're could be such things as attitude or things like the economy, global events, the weather, politics, sports,
Right.
right, all that kind of stuff. I might be concerned about it, but it doesn't impact me in my day to day life. And so, at any given point in time, you're either doing something proactive or you're doing something that's not moving you forward. There,
And
go ahead.
some of those things might have a huge impact on you, but you still can't control them. There's no impact that you can have on them, right?
Yeah, I think Covey did a nice job. He labeled it, circle of concern. I
Yeah.
have no control over the weather, but the weather may impact
Right.
whether or not my outdoor event goes well. Right?
Right.
I have very little influence over things that are made at corporate decision wise.
Right.
We work a lot in the car business, so, right? Which model cars they discontinue or decide to keep building. I may be concerned about that. I have no control over it. It may impact me,
Yeah.
but I can't spend, right? Covey's idea was you can't spend your time thinking about, worrying about, consumed by things that you cannot control.
Yeah.
And
Just fruitless.
yeah, and for some people, that I just saved you like 3 years of therapy.
Yeah.
like,
Honestly.
yeah, I gotta quit laying awake at night thinking about things that I have no control over, whether it's other people or some of the things that we just listed.
Yeah. Uh, we're going to have a guest speaker in, I think it'll be 2 episodes from now, who will be on the podcast, an author who survived a lot of trauma. And I think you just took a page out of her playbook. We're going to get a really neat story just in time for Christmas about that. But in terms of Stephen Covey, I mean, this is an old concept, right? This is, you know, there's a lot of psychological research about this in modern times, but the Stoics were people who talked about just operating out of the things that you could control and working on yourself. Jesus talks about tomorrow's got enough worries for itself. Let tomorrow worry about itself. You can focus on the here and now. He said, you know, um, uh, he says the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And all these things being, what do I eat? What do I wear? Am I going to be able to be taken care of? Don't worry about that. Here's the thing that you can focus on is seeking God first. Well, okay, there's some ancient versions of this.
Mm-hmm.
But Covey took it to a place that was incredibly, incredibly practical. And I think we've got kind of a little bit of an outline here, Mike, that I kind of want to make sure I don't miss any of these steps. But talking about it in terms of how the circle of influence works at an organizational level. So one of the things that we had down in the outline was resource allocation.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with our resources?
Yeah, and he talks about it from the standpoint of reactive, which would be
Yeah,
those things in the circle of concern. So
right.
I'm allowing life to happen to me. Things, these things that concern me. Yeah, maybe they do show up, and then I respond. I react to them. The proactive idea of this would be the focus and resource allocation. Okay, there are things within my control. What time am I going to spend? What effort am I going to make on the things that are within the scope of my control? And you think about this from a personal growth or a leadership standpoint,
Hmm.
right? And it's fascinating, because in the book, Covey also reintroduces us to the Eisenhower matrix. In the Eisenhower matrix, one of the quadrants in this is things that are important and not urgent.
Yep.
Everything that matters in life is important but not urgent.
Yep.
And it's also things that are within your circle of influence, things you can control. So coaching team members, strategic planning, optimizing processes, building relationships with your team members or customers, all of these things completely within the scope of my control, all of them proactive, right? If I coach my team members, if we have a plan, if we improve processes, if I strengthen relationships, all of that is going to prepare me for these concerns that may or may not come true. But if they do, come to fruition, we will be better positioned to deal with them.
Yeah. And one of his big points is that if you focus on the circle of influence, it grows and the concerns become less of a concern,
Well,
become smaller areas.
and my aversion to math, right? So I hate math. I'm not a math guy. In this case, the math is pretty simple. If you're doing something 100% of the time, if you spend 1 hour in the circle of concern focused on things that you have no control over, that is by default mathematically 1 hour that you haven't spent in the circle of influence.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so you're either standing in the circle of concern or circle of influence. There is no in between. And so the beauty of it is, yeah, for every hour that I spend in the circle of influence, coaching, planning, improving, strategizing, building relationships, every hour that I spend there is an hour I did not spend.
Yeah.
Right? I know this seems obvious, but you should see people's eyeballs light up when you talk about
Yep.
this, right? That you didn't spend in the circle of concern.
And that is the issue. That is the issue. I often talk about this when I work with a leadership team. I'll say, hey, how many of you feel like firefighters? Right. And every hand goes up. Everybody is. And so if you're in this room, it's because you're really smart and able to just grab the bull by the horns and deal with issues. Congratulations, you made it here. If there are fires, if there are problems to be solved, you're the firefighter. You go solve the problem. The issue becomes if you keep coming to the same house that's catching on fire like every morning, maybe we need to go have a conversation at the house, right? Maybe we need to do something proactive that's a step before this reactive step.
Mhm.
And so, and that could be any of the things you just talked about, right? It could be sitting down with your management team and saying, let's do some critical thinking about this one problem. Let's do a process enhancement or process improvement. Let's coach up that employee who seems to be struggling. Let's dive into the core issue here and address that. And that's called the circle of influence. And when you solve that issue, magically there are no more fires to put out in that particular arena. You can move on to other things. So this is something that we see play out sometimes very quickly. It's been an ongoing issue for months and months and months and months, and they keep just having Groundhog Day over this issue that they keep having to address. And then finally somebody says, wait, time out. What's under my control here? Let me dive into a root cause of what's going on. And I'm going to go have that hard conversation, or I'm going to go launch a team to work on the process improvement, or fill in the blank. And now they don't have Groundhog Day anymore. It's over. They can move on. That's the beauty of Covey's system.
Oh yeah, well, and you see practical applications of that
Yep.
where you see departments and departments are with a lot of stuff going on, and they institute a morning huddle,
Yes.
a 5 to 10 minute stand up meeting where they talk about, all right, what's going to happen today. All right, we
Yeah.
got two guys that are out sick. I got this big client that's coming in about 1 o'clock. We need to prep for that. I got this going on. All right, and then they're spending time, in the circle of influence, talking about what they have to do and how to get ready for it. And then lo and behold, the rest of the day goes smoothly because we've eliminated the reactive firefighting surprises that
Right.
would come up had we not had this initial discussion. So I've carved out some time in the morning for planning, strategizing, getting everybody on the same page. That's in my circle of influence. I can call that meeting, I can have that discussion, and lo and behold, I eliminate all these fires. Right.
Right.
Yeah. The guy sticking his head, hey, don't forget our big client sitting out in the lobby.
Right.
Yeah, so we don't need that. And we
And
can get it, we can get ahead of that.
another benefit is what this does for your personal leadership. So I'm not talking about somebody who's in a management role exclusively, but as you focus on your circle of influence, your influence grows.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that means you're more influential, right? You're modeling behavior that you want to see with the rest of the people on your team. You're inspirational to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all sorts of benefits of that. You start to see behavior change. We're no longer playing the blame game. We're actually trying to figure out problems to solve and dealing with that instead of attacking each other. Um, uh, the one that I'm so guilty of is that I go into kind of a cruise control mode and like, okay, this is going pretty well. I'm not going to think about it anymore. And that's stagnation, right? Instead, I need to be constantly innovating. You're really good at this, by the way. This is one of the reasons the workshops that we do together always go so well, because you're thinking of things that would be like, what would be something that would really surprise and delight our audience this month? And I usually go into cruise control mode on that. So I've been adopting some of your behaviors, by the way, with some of my individual clients. There's a good example of how you've inspired by being a proactive person to get other people to be more proactive. And just ownership in general, right? I'm going to take ownership of what's under my control. This happens so often. It's one of my favorite coaching questions is to say, what part of this do you own? Right?
Right.
It could be this whole big thing that has been thrust upon you, this really negative circumstance. And the question is, what part of this do you own? And I remember years ago, I was talking with he wasn't a department head, he was a business unit head. And he had a dust up with part of the family that owned the company. And, it had been negative for a few months and I couldn't quite figure it out. And at the end of one of our meetings, I finally, just a one-on-one coaching session, I said, "What part of this do you own?" And he didn't really have an answer for me in the moment. I came back a month later. His whole demeanor has changed. Everything's back to fine. The business is running well in his area, and everything's hunky dory. And I was like, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, I really thought about what you said, and it just hit me. What's under my control is getting over it. They hurt my feelings.
Getting
It
over.
hurt my feelings. I just had to say that out loud. It hurt my feelings. And once I did that, it was like, you know what? That's silly. I'm a grown man. I'm going to get over it." And the business thrived. So ownership of the problem, right, is what you're seeing a person who's proactive do, and it's going to inspire that in others.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting, right? It took him a month to figure out the answer to the
Yeah,
question,
you
which
had to
is
think about it.
it's just perfect, right? Because we're so in the moment that we don't realize what we're doing in those moments.
That's right. That's right.
And so, yeah, a coach getting you to pause and analyze, okay, what put you here, and
Right.
can you move to a different place?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I talk to salespeople about this idea, right, we run an exercise. I'll have them, I'll give them post-it notes. All right, write down on post-it notes what are things that you talk about and spend time on during the day, productive and non-productive. And they'll make post-it notes, and I'll draw the circle of influence, circle of concern. For those of you on the podcast, basically imagine the logo for Target for the Target stores.
Yeah.
All right, the center circle is your circle of influence. The outer circle is your circle of concern. So I draw that sophisticated diagram on a big piece of flip chart paper, and we just start. They bring their post-it notes up and say, "All right, what do you got? Prospecting for new business. All right, is that circle of influence, circle of concern? Oh, that's completely within my scope of control. I don't need a manager. I don't need anybody else to help me do that. All right, put that there. All right. Complaining about inventory. All right. Do you have control over inventory? No. All right. That's a circle of concern. All right.
Right.
Discussing, the weekend sports activities. All right. Do you have any control over if your team wins or loses? I think I do, but actually you don't. All right, that goes in circle of concern. All right, I changed jerseys. I thought that would help, but so we just diagram this whole thing, and it becomes starkly amazing how many post-it notes are in the circle of concern.
Mm.
And so, we strip all those away and say, all right, if you spent just a little bit more time in the circle of influence versus circle of concern, how much more productive would you be?
Love that.
And I'm fond of, at that point, I mark out the word influence. So instead of circle of influence, I mark that out and I write the word affluence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is your circle of affluence. If you spent more time with your customers, prospecting, following up on unsold traffic, marketing, right, posting the business development things on social media, would that increase your affluence? Right? Would that increase your income? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So if you don't want to, if influence doesn't resonate with you, call it the circle of affluence and get to work on that.
I
And
love that.
it's amazing how much. Same thing. You come back a month later and people are like, "Oh man, I've stopped doing this. I'm not focused. I've actually eliminated myself from some people who were distracting me and keeping me in the circle of concern. I focus more on this. Things are better. I'm doing well. Yeah, it's just the model is so simple. But yeah, you can draw it on a napkin, you can draw it on a piece of paper, and just have this conversation with yourself or with anybody else, and start the diagram. Right, where am I spending my time and on what activities?
Spot on. And I love how, it really is a mindset shift, right? Like that's part of what's happening is those salespeople were coming to some realizations about, oh, wait a minute, this isn't helping me. And this other thing is, I should do that thing. It's the same with emotional intelligence, right? That this is something that helps center you on, wait a minute, I don't need to get upset about X or Y or Z. whether or not the company I work for is doing enough advertising for my sales to really take off. That's not under my control. Prospecting's under my control. So instead of being upset about the decisions of others, I'm going to focus on the things that will help me. That's a regulator, I think, for some of the negative reactionary emotions that we have that keeps you in check and says, "Wait a minute, let me manage myself here. Let me manage myself," which is emotional intelligence.
Oh yeah, I remember we were. It was '08, '09. Things were kind of slow, and I remember going into a store and they had this guy, and he was their top guy. Had been their top guy for decades, and his name was Tony. I said, "How's it going?" Things are slow. It's down. I said, "How's Tony doing?" And I remember the manager looks at me and goes, "Tony has no idea that there's a recession." He just keeps selling at the same level. He has no idea, right? He has no idea about current events. He has no idea about the news. He has no idea about politics. Yeah, nobody's told him that things are slow. And in turn, he's doing exact same volume of sales he's always done.
Oh man.
And you're like, yeah, he's so in the circle of influence, right? He's so focused on what he can control. He doesn't even know that there's things going on.
So let me tell you what the exact opposite of that looks like. Because I'm not going to mention any names, any brands, but I had a factory rep for a particular car brand who came and met with one of my dealers, and they were in a pretty bad slump. The news was pretty grim in the financial papers and so on. And he came in, he said to the dealer, "Do you think we're going to make it?" And that set the tone for everything that happened for the rest of that year between the manufacturer and the dealership. I mean, just a comedy of errors. And and by the way, they did make it. It's
Mhm.
still a thriving business. But that particular person decided to see it that way, and colored everything in terms of how they were able to work with that particular dealership. The dealership's like, "Man, if it's that bad, I don't know that I want to play ball with you guys."
Right.
So there's that. Can we also talk about teams, like what this looks like, not just for the individual, for the manager, but if you're empowering a team to work this way, that can be done as well. And it made me think of a three little letters, Mike, CIT.
Our continuous improvement teams.
That's right. That's right. You and I have launched many an employee team that was focused on continuous improvement. I think that's a good example of helping people focus on what's under their control and working out of their circle of influence. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, and we often have this conversation, share the model with these teams early because the teams tend to drift off into circle of concern topics.
Right.
They're like, well, we need a new building. This one's outdated. The neighborhood around the store has changed. It's not as
Yep.
affluent as it used to be. There's a guy across town. He's doing a better job with marketing. That
Yeah.
you start to hear all these. We can't get better because of all these circle of concern things.
Yep.
And then we focus the continuous improvement team. All right, so what is within the scope of our control? And there's layers of it. So what
Yeah.
can we as the team do without asking anybody else, without permission from a manager or anybody? What could we be doing more, better, different, or less to change outcomes? And then the teams would put together a list of things that only management could change.
Yep.
Right. So, and then we'd have them prioritize that list and say, all right, so, here's 5 or 6 things that we think this one would be the easiest to do with the highest impact.
Yep.
And we'll present that to management and see if we can get traction, get them to buy into to doing something more, better, different, or less as well. And so, but yeah, they always wandered into the circle of concern. And if
Yep.
you weren't careful, right, they'd get discouraged when you talk about morale and attitude and things like that. Man, you spend some time in the circle of concern thinking about things you can't control and how they're going to negatively impact you. That will take you down, right? That will
It
bring you down.
Yeah, and it made some organizations we've worked with who couldn't grasp that and get a hold of it early. I'm going to have to cuss to say this, but I had a dealer who said, I'm not doing that anymore, Mark. We did that with another facilitator before you, and those CITs, they're bitch sessions.
Yep.
And that's not what we're going for, right? What we're going for is what can we influence as a team. And I think you said that very well. There are some things that we could just implement. We can influence those ourselves. We also have influence over how we present some things to management.
Mhm.
We need to make it to where you say, you know what, you've made the case. I would be foolish to not do that plan you presented to me. I simply need to say yes, and you guys have worked out how to implement it, and you've made it clear that it's going to make me money or save me money. Let's do it. And so a really good team focuses on how they give that presentation and the research they do to come up with their plan. So either way, it's a big win for empowering a team to get them to focus on those things under their control.
Oh yeah. Well, another way to use it, I've had stores, I've had organizations that have installed this as language. So we
Ooh,
review the
yeah.
model, right? When we all come to an agreement, what is circle of concern, circle of influence? We talk about specific examples.
Yep.
And now it becomes a shortcut for conversations.
Yep.
So the manager's working, team member walks into his office, starts, having a conversation. The manager can call timeout, right? They both agreed, right? We can call timeout and go, all right, before we go any further, is this a circle of concern or is this a circle of influence discussion?
Yep.
And then you'll see like the team member will get like, yeah, it's a circle of concern. Neither one of us can change what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Okay. And then the proactive manager follows up with, all right, so what can we do that'll make a difference?
Yeah.
And now we're back on track. I've seen right where you've got the huddle, right? You get all the sales guys standing in a huddle, and sales manager will walk right in the middle of them and go, all right, is this a circle of concern or circle of influence discussion? And yeah, all right, let's go do something productive. Right. Or you'll find out, yeah, they're brainstorming how to get more people
Yeah.
to, demo the product or whatever the thing might be. You go, all right, this is a great conversation. Keep going. Right. Yeah, let me know how I can add to it. So yeah, the idea that I can use this to shortcut conversations and refocus people in a very quick manner, right? We can
Yeah.
have a long extended conversation about is this useful or not? Can we really do anything about this? Or is this a concern thing or an influence thing? Once we figure out which is which, we'll know what we need to do from this point forward.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And I'll steal from our mentor, Dolores Hazel, one quick little coaching question she asked as a manager when she was, sort of brought in on a conversation like this was somebody's complaining, they're fussing about a coworker or about a system or whatever. And she would say, "What do you want me to do with this information?" And that's the question, right?
Right.
And it's a litmus test, right? That's a way to say, oh, I'm just fussing, I'm venting, I'll get over it, I'll get back to work, or well, actually, I think there's something we need to do here, and then you can have a more serious discussion.
Oh yeah.
Um, let's wrap this up with we've got some sort of practical applications summarizing some things you can do with this, and then you've got a really neat metaphor that I think is pretty solid here. So um, let's wrap it up with the practical applications first, and I'll put it in two categories. One is sort of just daily leadership practices, and another is being a coaching manager or having managers that you want to be coaching managers. So the daily leadership practices, you know, first thing you got to do is do that exercise you said, right? Identify the areas of concern and identify the areas of influence, and go ahead and put those down as one or the other, as you earlier said, right? You've
Mhm.
got to figure out what the things that you're spending your time on, are they influence or are they concern?
Oh yeah, yeah. An example of this, right? You learn this in time management, right? One of the things they have you do is keep a journal, right? Every 15 minutes, just make a
Yep.
note. What did you spend the last 15 minutes on? And
Yep.
it's very simple, right? You don't even have to write a lot of detail. You can just put the topic, and then you could put beside it, was this an I, a circle of influence thing,
Yep.
or was this a C, a circle of concern thing? And just by looking at that, you can get a sense of where am I spending my time as a leader.
Yeah.
Right? Am I spending it on influenceable things like training and employee development and onboarding and hiring and all those types of things, planning and vision, all that stuff that would make a difference? Or did I spend time complaining about the business, the
Right.
corporate, whatever?
Market. Yeah.
Yeah, the market, the weather, right? So just by being conscious, just becoming more conscious of that makes you a better leader.
Yeah. Name it to tame it, as we have said many times, right? If I
Mm-hmm.
can name that, this is not something worth my concern. I don't need to be spending time here. You can sometimes just by saying that move on from it. And I like what you said about engaging employees, process improvement, customer experience, things that I can actually have an impact on. And especially if you're a manager, developing your people, getting them engaged, that's like the one thing you can't delegate. There's a lot of things you could delegate off your plate, but you can't delegate developing your people. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right, so that's daily leadership practices. Let's talk about coaching managers. And we've got a point here to, train your managers to differentiate between the two circles so that they focus. That's spending time with your managers, helping them see the things that you're already seeing.
Oh yeah, yeah, and when we're diving into maybe it's the monthly financial report, right? How did we do last month?
Yep.
Right, we can look at it from the standpoint of, okay, what can we learn from this data that we can control, that we can
Right.
change? And sometimes that involves teaching the managers that, what goes into that particular metric. What are the specific activities that go into this metric that create this number? And if I change the activities that are within the scope of my control, could I change the number?
Yeah. Yeah.
And teaching people to think like that, to differentiate between influence and concern, and to spend more of their time in the influence category.
And you'll know if you have a manager who's wrestling with this when you have a lengthy discussion with them and there's absolutely zero action items that come out of it,
Yep.
right? And you gave an example that I think is a good one. A service or parts manager who has a manufacturer who, I mean, we've had everything, right? We've had the war in Ukraine affect the parts supply. We've had engineering defects that have affected the parts supply. Bottom line is they can't fix a car because they can't get the part. And there are some fixed ops managers, as we call them in the biz, that throw up their hands at that point. But the really smart ones are able to refocus themselves on the circle of influence and say, okay, I'm going to have to get creative about working with my parts department to source this elsewhere. I'm going to have to stay really on top of communication with my customers so they know that there's not they're not forgotten and we're not being lazy, but there's a real issue here. But again, sometimes the manager needs help differentiating between influence and concern so that they can actually get to work on those proactive things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea of, okay, so what can you do here? And
That's right. What can you do?
yeah, what can you do? And all of a sudden, right now, we're there's possibilities, right? Or and our wonderful question, all right, and what else?
Yes.
Right, we get one action item, and what else? Right, we're going to focus on, maybe there's multiple things I can do within the circle of influence,
Yeah.
and now I've got options, I've got choices, all of them within the scope of my control.
Yeah. It's not A or B. It's not win or lose. There's a number of different options, a number of different alternatives. Okay, so to bring us home, you have this lovely metaphor of a fire. Can you
Yes.
explain how that affects this
Yeah.
little understanding?
So if the idea of the Target logo is
Yep.
not speaking to you, it's not resonating, think of it as a campfire. The fire being the circle of influence, and the darkness around the campfire being the circle of concern. So it seems pretty obvious that if I tend to the fire, I keep
Mm-hmm.
feeding it, I tend to it, I manage it, it will grow bigger and it will cast more light and heat.
Mm.
So the more I focus on the fire, the bigger it gets, the more energy that it puts out. if I turn my back to the fire and just look out into the darkness, the areas that are just beyond the fire, and
Yeah.
worry about, right, are there creatures, are there, right, is it gonna get colder, is it what, like, just worrying about, right, the unknown that I cannot see. All right, when I turn back around, my fire may have gone out.
Yeah.
And so it's by attention to the circle of influence, to the fire, that you can create more light, more energy, more positive behaviors, more positive outcomes.
I love it. I love it. And, so much of this is about outlook, right? Am I looking at the fire? Am I looking at the darkness? It's a mindset issue. And let me tease our next episode because I have a lovely quote from the 1700s about this concept. Again, Covey didn't invent this. This is really old stuff. But here's a way of looking at it from a mindset perspective. He who has so little knowledge of human nature as to seek happiness by changing anything but his own dispositions will waste his life in fruitless effort.
Wow.
One more time. He who has so little knowledge of human nature as to seek happiness by changing anything but his own dispositions will waste his life in fruitless efforts. That is Samuel Johnson, who we will be revisiting with a different quotation next episode. A fascinating human being. But we hope that this really helps folks set a tone for the month of December. It's a great month to be focused on the things under your control as we wrap up a wild year and no doubt have a wild start to next year with the election and everything going on with the economy and wars and rumors of wars. But bottom line is there are things under our influence that we can be influencing that will help us a lot more than worrying about the stuff on the outside. So hope this helps everybody.
Oh, indeed. No, well said, and excited to wrap this up and turn it over to our announcer, the perpetually happy John Wolf. Yes.
Interesting.
So go ahead and tweet that, or share it any other way you want. As always, there are no rights reserved, no trademarks, no copyrights. Share it if you want to. And join us next time on It Doesn't Take a Genius.
That's good.